Hello, I am Madeline James, and welcome to part 2 of the interview that I did for Oliver Brackenbury and Jay Wolfe concerning their upcoming anthology, Beating Hearts and Battle Axes, which is going to have a Backerkit campaign from June 20th to July 20th. It's a lot of fun. Everything's linked below. If you haven't seen part 1, go back and check that out. We talked a lot about the anthology and publishing, and in this part 2, we are talking about Romantasy and Sword and Sorcery and some of the tropes and the ways they can be combined, their compatibilities, all of that, and then getting some really good advice for authors. It's very great. If you want to look in the chapters, I have all the different questions separated out, and yeah, enjoy the stream. So my next section of questions is specifically about this combining of Sword and Sorcery and Romantasy, and is getting into a little bit more of the genre specifics or subgenre specifics.
Sure.
So as was the first one, a little bit more vague, but are there any books or stories in particular that inspired you in the creation of the anthology that just had the vibe that you're thinking of, we want this vibe kind of thing?
Jay?
Do you want to take this one, Oliver? You want me to
I feel like I kind of trod on myself already with this, right? Because I just keep thinking of People in the Black Circle and I want more kissing in that story, goddammit. Yeah, for me it was almost exclusively looking at stories that didn't go as far in this direction as I wanted and just fantasizing about being able to turn a big knob on, to get it where I wanted. So it was more me looking at, I guess, a perceived lack in things that I love than things that were already where I wanted it to be. So that's how I don't have any answers for things that are what I wanted. I just have things that were nearly what I wanted and not quite. But I don't know. But how about you, Jay? Did you feel?
Well, and again, I come from a slightly different tradition where trying to think of there's not really a TLDR way to explain ElfQuest, but basically the romantic relationships are very much A plots in the stories, and so the way that romance is approached in those stories is not really very traditional, and so there's some world building in those relationships that I think is interesting, and I think that that's sort of how I ended up on that track just as a writer in general, and so my interest is just going to kind of naturally go to those sort of non-traditional kind of strange stories, and Sword and Sorcery is sort of a natural home for those kind of things because again there's a lot of history of stories that nearly do that or do that but then dance away from it a little bit, and so I'm trying to think of a good way to make it make sense, but I feel like a lot of it was just sort of yeah, let's stitch this together. Let's really make the statement, so to speak. And I don't think we're the first or the only ones, but I feel very strongly that we're going to be putting a very big flag on it.
Yeah, I hope so. So tropes, I think there are a lot of very obvious tropes in Sword and Sorcery and in Romantasy, in both of those. But what are one of the ones, the tropes, the archetypes, the trends, right, that you think are really shared between those genres?
I think the high emphasis on character is the thing that I would say is sort of that's the first piece of filament that I'm looking at and going oh, this thread blends into this tapestry really well. That's the natural, because when you follow a character through a story for any length of time, you do get into their head, you get into their wants and their little emotional things, and I feel like at least the tendency in Sword and Sorcery for those characters to be very you're very centered on the characters. It's not one of those with a lot of epic fantasy or grimdark, you're kind of focusing on a group of people as a character instead of a very tight narrow cast. And so as far as that goes, I think that's one of the easy kind of common ground between these two genres.
Yeah.
that I think is part of why why you get such an instantaneous oh yeah, that threads together. I'm trying to think of there's other things too, but I think that's one that speaks to me on the meta level, thinking about nothing else but just sort of why these two genres, that's sort of where it is. But you don't want to let go of the idea that you have a very strong you have a very strong adventuring plot and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And to be fair, like romance is also a very plot driven thing.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
like you can't really be weak on either of those things here. And I
Right.
think that's the part that's maybe like the most exciting.
Yeah, just do everything. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Throw it all in and see what sticks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that I do think character first, but plot can't be, you can't excise plot in just just do character stuff. Like it has to
Mhm.
be both of those things.
So what about on the other end, the less compatible side? Like, is there any tropes or archetypes or anything on either side that once you bring them together, it's like these kind of need to just kind of fall off?
I mean, all right. So, I don't know that there's, it's not like there's like, I don't think that there's a lot of like genuine awful things that must go away.
Mhm.
But I will say that like traditionally a lot of the things that we think of as classic sword and sorcery are not super inviting
Mhm.
to a wide group of people who are avid readers. And
Right.
so trying to make it more inviting by telling stories that are relatable to those audiences but are also relatable to the audiences that really like sword and sorcery is another one of those things where we're going to be threading a bit of a needle.
Mhm.
And I don't think that I don't think it's particularly challenging to thread that needle. I think that that's why New Age Sword and Sorcery exists and why there was such just a gangbusters response to it, especially this past winter during the crowdfund. Like
Mhm.
I think that that says a lot about what people want to see in this
Mhm.
particular subgenre. So I don't think that that's I don't think that's an especially controversial way to put it, but
Yeah.
I know that
No, I
there's
think that's
definitely
good.
like there's definitely some people who feel like sword and sorcery should be a very fenced in walled garden. And
Mhm.
I think those people just mm, could stand to have a little bit more imagination sometimes for a genre that is so much about the imagination. Like,
Mhm.
Well, it's
Yeah,
tricky, right?
that's true.
Because like I completely agree with you, Jay, and at the same time, I'm like I understand where some of those people are coming from because
oh,
the
absolutely.
subgenre has lain fallow for so long, and for a lot of people, like I say, the definitions become diffused and just meaning wizard shit.
Oh yeah, I mean
So I can see why people get
there's already
protective
great
of it.
diffusion around the terminology, which is so
Yeah,
frustrating.
right, right. So it's just kind of funny thing where like I totally get where they're coming from, but at the same time, like any genre at all, if you're too strict about what it is and what's allowed within it, eventually it becomes kind of like a cult that just like will eventually age out into insignificance, right? And also the fact of the matter is that sometimes like some of those people's very strict definitions are even stricter than you would define Robert E. Howard, the guy who birthed it, right? You know, they have these
Right.
very narrow versions. They're like, oh, you don't have this in Sword and Sorcery, and it's like Robert E. Howard would do it in 5 stories of his. So yeah, it's very funny. There's this very constricted way of looking at things, and I'm always trying to like dance between like I want to have like okay, sword and sorcery is really specific, but also you can do a lot with it, right? Like
Right.
you know, and perhaps have more romance. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe would you say, Jay, because you know better than I do, would you say romantasy is less or more prescriptive than like your average essence
Um
buyer?
Well, so the interesting thing with romantasy, at least as I see it, is that like it has rules in the way that like romance has rules.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like people are still trying to figure out what those rules are. And there's
Mhm.
the advantage that we have that this genre is like exploding on the internet is like such a different situation than like something where it's like, oh, this magazine in the 20s is publishing these kind of stories. Oh, and now this magazine is publishing these kind of stories. Like the type of like collective energy that builds a subgenre is kind of like just it's ramping very quickly. And so like that's one of those things where I feel like being part of that long conversation is also very fascinating. Like
Mhm.
um, and that was actually one of the reasons that I wanted to pull the specific cover artist that we did, Emmy Morgan. Like, she does covers for romantasy books, and
Yeah.
so I felt really strongly that like her artistic and visual voice was going to be like an easy way to telegraph to people who are otherwise not really very familiar with what we're doing. Like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, like I can see that this couple on this cover are like they're DTF. So
Yeah.
like, um, like that specific visual language of romantasy is one of the things that I wanted to pull in and sort of like make inviting to to people from completely outside of our sphere, to be like, all right, well, we're going to be doing something a little bit different from what you're doing, but I promise you it's not off of your menu. Like, it's like you'll find something you like here.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and with the cover, of course, that was tricky, right? Because that was I won't name the other artists we were looking at, but we were looking at a couple of different
yeah.
artists, and like it basically came down to very much like, do we want someone who is very like romantically sort of coded, doing like sword and sorcery subject matter, right? Like we've got this barbarian on the cover and everything, and he's done, or do we want to have someone who's a SNS style art doing something more romantasy subject matter? Which way do we go from that? It was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we settled on what we settled on, and I'm very happy with what we've done. But that's just like,
Mm-hmm.
one of the real
We got
examples of us
exceedingly
like,
lucky here, I think.
Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
good
No, no,
Yeah,
I'm totally happy.
it
I'm
was
just saying, yeah, that
oh
was
I'm
an example of
yeah,
the
no,
kind
I
of
mean,
decisions we're doing, where we're just constantly on this line of like, is it
yes.
60-40 this way or that way kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I mean, just in terms of making a thing, and like, because we were approaching an artist to do something that they are not necessarily doing, the romantasy part is easy, but like, all right, we also need the physicality of sword and sorcery, and like, and there is like a visual language history of sword and sorcery that's very much like a very specific style, and she just absolutely nailed it, and I'm so excited about that part. But it is part of like that, speaking to that audience in a way, like, because we don't have anything else to show them, to be like, okay, yes, this is definitely in your bailiwick. Like, an
Mm-hmm.
easy way to do that is visual shorthand.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what would you say are some of the more like, not to say that you had to deal with this right in putting this anthology together, but what would you say are some of the more overused or overdone elements right now in romantasy and or like the sword and sorcery genres at the moment?
Ooh, oh, that's a
Uh,
toughie.
well, Jay, why don't you hit up the romantasy ones, because you'll know those better than me.
Well, so I mean, I don't know that there's anything that's like too much in romantasy yet, because I hear a lot of complaining about how romantasy is everywhere. But the thing that we forget when we're all inside one room as writers and readers is that it's a like, if you're in genre, it's a really small room.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the number of people reading any kind of fantasy is so much smaller than any group of people reading any other, like in terms of like regular category romance, or like
Right.
thrillers, or the Pattersons of the world kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we get angry about like, oh, everybody's talking about Brandon Sanderson, but like, for real, like, in terms of like scale and volume, like, it's a really small room still. And so
Mm-hmm.
the idea that there's like enough romantasy is like kind of I don't really think that that's true or possible, especially because, as a like an active subgenre that people have been pursuing with a name on it, it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
young. Like,
Right. Yeah.
as a topic, as a category, it's been decades and decades in the making, and has a long history of its own, leaning on authors like Mercedes Lackey, or like pretty much every fantasy author from the 80s, with a female name, is going to be somebody that was doing something that was probably a little more romantic than most of the male names that we remember from the same era. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, it's one of those things where the bones have always been there, but now we can see them. Like, the
Mm-hmm.
fossil was underneath there the whole time. It's not like we're not Columbusing this one. We're not digging this fossil out and like we're the discoverer of this dinosaur. No, what it is that, like, we're taking a thing that was already there, and we're naming it, and prescribe, like, there's some prescriptive things for it, but honestly, like, I think the biggest thing that I am like, the thing that I find frustrating, or the thing that I wish would be like, is the kind of like rapid, like, effort to like define what is or isn't romantasy, or like, or just to like be dismissive of it, in the same way that,
Mm-hmm.
like, honestly,
Yeah.
a lot of people are dismissive of sword and sorcery.
Yeah.
Like, the phrase sword and sorcery was not always used in a positive manner. So, like,
Mhm.
this is one of those things where, like, I feel like the derogatory use of romantasy is probably the thing that I'm the most sort of like sad or frustrated about, because it's sort of like, it's inevitable that there's going to be backlash to anything that is romance plus a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just sort of bread and butter romance as a genre conversation. Like,
And I
Yeah.
bet you I like that you identified another yin and yang that we kind of have with this project, though, because here I am being like, yeah, sword sorcery is a specific definition. People need to understand it's its own subgenre. And you're like, yeah, romantasy, let's not nail it down. Let's, let's not get too specific description about what that is. And that's fine because they're coming from different needs, right? I think that's kind of the thing that's kind of fun to marry here. What are they doing? I'm like holding two action figures. They're kissing. This is romantasy. This is sword sorcery. What are these hand gestures I'm doing? I don't know. But yeah, there you go, right? And then meanwhile, I'm thinking while you're talking, Jay, I'm thinking about like, well, what's too, I've seen too much of it in Sword and Sorcery, and it's like I'm always wary of saying that kind of thing because somebody's going to be able to do that thing. I'm so sick of X, and
right?
Somebody's gonna be like, I gotta hold.
Exactly. As soon as I make a declaration, someone's gonna
do an amazing version of X. Yeah, exactly. So
just say what you want to see then.
Yeah, and that's I do find that tends to be what I try to do, right? And it's also like focusing on the positives. Isn't that nice, And so yeah. I mean, and to that, I guess I've talked about already a bit here with the romance. I want to see a bit more of that. I also just want to see like what can I say? Like, I've talked about this with the magazine. I want to see a greater diversity of protagonists. I definitely. Again, in the whole world of writing, it's got to be out there. But I personally have not yet seen, say, like a heavier female character as a lead in a sword and sorcery story yet. I've seen like giant muscle women. I'm like, hey, let's have them too. But just I haven't seen sort of heavier protagonists. I guess a lot, male or female or non-binary. And I definitely want to see a bit more fighting parents. I think that'd be kind of fun to see. I mean, God of War's progression seems to suggest there's some demand for that. And it's out there. I can already think of one book I should mention, but we'll talk about our book here. And so. It's a lot of things where it's just like I want to see more. I'm not saying nobody's doing it, and I want to see more. Like, gosh, again, I'm worried about giving away things I've got plans for publishing wise. So I'll just say keep an eye as this book comes out and hopefully it succeeds and we get to do more books. Keep an eye on what I'm publishing, and that's kind of be largely how I will answer what I want to see more of. Is I will put it out into the world through my own words or the words of others, which is a delightful non-answer. I'm sorry, but it's probably actually the best answer I can give you. No, John, I was going to say, well, I was like, well, maybe there's one pet peeve I can share with you. Nope, no, I can't. I'm sorry. Because I'll say it and somebody will do it well. And I'll be like, well, actually, I like it too. So yeah, it's a very reasonable question, but a very tricky one.
It's so hard it's hard to make declarations about anything like that because the reality is I don't think any of us as readers and writers want to see less of something. We want to see more. That's part of the business. We're not in the business
or more of one thing or more variety, right? I mean,
and that's honestly, more variety is pretty much always going to be the thing. If you're like derivative is always going to be sort of a like, and figuring out like this is another piece of that long conversation thing, which figuring out what things what things in your like writerly sphere are speaking to you, like if you can identify them, if you can name them, that's going to help you identify what you're doing and differentiate it from all the other stories that are out there. So like instead of like, oh, it's another dragon romance or whatever, like what thing can you bring to dragon romance that's yours,
right?
And having the influence and the knowledge to go back to be like, honestly, even all the way back to somebody like Anne McCaffrey, whose stories were less like romances with dragons, but there was very much like a bond between the dragon riders and their dragons, for example. And that type of thing has gone on into stories like Fourth Wing. So like that sort of connection and like the like emotional tension and those kind of things, like what are you doing differently and what can you put in that only you could do? And that's always gonna be a more interesting story.
That sort of answered what my next question was going to be, which was about underused elements, which great 2-for-1. My next question is also a two-parter, but what do you think for romantasy stories, like how do they most benefit from pulling in some of those elements of sword and sorcery, and then the reverse, right? How is sword and sorcery the most like benefits the most from pulling in some of those?
Well, I'm just going to say one quickly, and then Jay, I'll pass over to you. Madeline, I remember you mentioned when we talked about this in the last interview, you were like, yeah, I love romantasy, but I wish there were more fight scenes. Well,
Sword
sorcery brings action and pacing, and I especially think like the weird with the capital W. Like I haven't read a lot of Romantasy. Like I say, part of why I brought Jane was their expertise in this.
Yeah.
But I get the sense that the way fantasy is expressed in Romantasy tends to be a little more contemporary, tends to be a little more like classic sort of D&D-ish elements, Tolkien-ish elements, and
Yeah.
less in the sense of like truly unique, strange, surprising stuff that kind of unsettles you. So I think like that sort of like almost love, not necessarily Lovecraft, but let's just use it as a shorthand, Lovecraftian horror, like sort of third table leg of sword and sorcery, kind of comes in there and could be bring variety to Romantasy that is not seen there much, as I understand it. So maybe that's one thing. The weird in the sword fights.
Yes, capital W weird is definitely one of the things that I'm always looking for in a sword and sorcery. Additionally, I think like trying to think of a good way to put it. Like I feel like the I do just kind of feel like they slot together so well that it's hard to
Yeah.
It's like
bodies,
and
right? We talk a lot about bodies in sword and
yes,
sorcery, and
both
obviously
of them are very bodily genres, and I feel like there's a I just I guess to me, and like again, this is one of those things where it's just sort of like because I'm a creature of my own unique influences and stuff, like these things never really seemed to be totally apart for me. It's just sort of like getting them together in the right way so that it conveys like that it doesn't skimp on any of those things.
Right.
All the flavors are in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's also like getting two puzzle pieces to just lock together rather than like filling in. I don't know.
There's complexities that I think both of them are sort of like they're complexities that are not necessarily obvious, that are still sort of natural to them. One of the things that I was telling people when I was first pitching them on like what this project is or what it could be, like when I was still trying to feel people out that I could ask to join me on this journey. One of the things that I used to tell people is like there is sort of a happily ever after mode in sword and sorcery, and that is the implication of adventures behind and adventures ahead. And so like the idea that these characters might have adventured together before and they might go on to do something else together later, like there's no guarantees. That's very much a happy for now, but like in terms of the idea that like a happily ever after, and for like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse or like Elric and Moonglum or any of those other like adventuring duo kind of stories, is the idea that they get to go do more adventuring. So why can't we have that and also like some romantic elements? Like I don't think those things are unnatural to each other in terms of storytelling. And so
don't you think also maybe it's like each genre has like the same quality but coming from a different angle, so twinned it just turns up the volume. I think about how both obviously passion is a part of Romantasy. I don't need to explain why it is there, but I also think it's like this life affirming passion is also a big part of sword and sorcery. It's what separates it tonally from say your grimdarks, right? In the sense of like, happily ever after for that is like, well, we're gonna keep on adventuring. We got all this money and we lost it 10 minutes later, but that's fine. We lost all the money. We'll try and go get some more treasure next time. Whatever, There's the life affirming, very physically rooted thing of like the athleticism and the action and the feeling the weather, on your face kind of thing, like all that. Like it just seems very rooted in the five senses. And whether you're talking about the five senses as expressed through romantic interactions or through action, adventure, and crazy settings, either way, it's like, life, And I just think, why don't we just get all of those elements of life together? And again, I'm making my action figures kiss, and then we have this super hybrid, that's it just gets me really excited, as you can tell. I just love getting that feeling like, yes, this is sword and sorcery, this is Romantasy, this is sword and sorcery and Romantasy. Like it just gets me pumped when I actually Anyway, so that's what I think. I think maybe that's it. You said it, Jay. It's not so much there's a lot of big lacks either one fixes. It's that there's like elements that are commonly held, expressed differently, and then let's have all the expressions together. Boom. Yeah.
Right.
I just make fun of myself. I'm still doing this. Like, for God's sake. What if two people smooched? That's my big theory. Anyway.
Don't make me send you some dolls, Oliver, because I could send you some dolls.
Oh my God.
I hope that answers
So,
your question.
so for world building specifically,
Yeah.
and given the what we've kind of talked about with the last few questions, like thinking about this more from the angle of like more like not I don't want to say like mainstream romantasy, but more the like really
Right.
like trending, like we're talking our like TikTok romantasy kind of
Yeah.
what's going on over there right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm in. I feel like I feel very awkward because I'm not sure I'm in conversation with all of those. Just because, like, I feel like I do feel like some of those are definitely like spawning off of. Those are kind of spawning off of things like epic fantasy or War
Mhm.
Grim Dark or stuff like that.
Right,
So
right.
I feel a lot less confident being like, oh well, this is definitely this or that. But
Mm.
I will gamely attempt to
We
to
can
string them
speculate. It'll
together.
be um but one of the things that, and we talked about this a lot in the last interview, but like Sword and
Yeah.
Sorcery has that very like smaller scale, that like
Right.
grittier, that more like that low level view in the world building where you're just really immersed in the like
Right.
right what they're physically experiencing right there, physically seeing right
Right.
there. And like what I see in a lot of the like trending whatever romantasy is
Right.
a very different, like very, very high level where they're like, oh yes, I am Lord so and I'm so and so
Yeah.
of like 87 kingdoms, and we're like trouncing about, and
Yeah.
it's very high level world building. Um and so it doesn't sound like this was actually a problem or something that had to be like reconciled for the anthology, but for
Well,
trying
yes
to
and no,
yes
because we
and
did
no,
bring in
okay.
some people who have a little bit more of a trad fantasy background.
Okay.
And so like kind of tempering expectations and like so like even within like the bounds of like what's called sword and sorcery, like there are some sort of like I hesitate to call them limitations because they're not really
Okay.
limitations. They're just sort of like expectations that if you're not going to meet those expectations, you should probably find an interesting reason why not. Um
Right.
and so like just as like a for example, like um for stories that are dealing with like a kingdom and like all of the like things like the kind of castle fantasy stuff,
Right. Right.
you have to still tighten in on character, and you
Mhm.
generally have to tighten in on characters who are not you're tightening on someone whose life is not necessarily trying to think of a way to put it, like you're not playing a lot with like the kingdom royalty like
Yeah, no, I
nonsense,
know, I know.
like
I think I know what you're
titled
saying, Jay. If I
titled
can,
titled
yeah,
nonsense.
Yeah.
like if I can leave it for a second, yeah, I just recently finished a Sword and Sorcery classic from the early '80s called "Nift the Lean" by
Yeah.
Michael Shea, collection of sort of
Okay.
novelette length stories, more or less, all focused on this thief called Nift, who was known as the Lean
Yes.
because he's a lean, skinny guy.
Yes.
Whatever. Point is, almost of the stories he gets wrapped up in actually do tend to involve like whole kingdoms or multiple kingdoms at war or whatever, and
Right.
then some king, his son tried out something magical and poof, got sucked into hell. And so we open on Niftaline about to be cut into 5 pieces as like a trial for thieving, and then the king's like, wait a minute, that guy's tricky, maybe we can get him to go find my kid. Okay, don't kill him. And so we're off to the
Right.
races, and we get a bunch of like preamble maybe with like, oh well, this kingdom and that kingdom and blah blah, but we get that for like a paragraph, and then very
Right.
quickly
Mhm.
get to the point of like, and anyway, this is all what's going on in the background for our poor guy who's in this
Yeah.
really
Meanwhile in hell.
situation.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
he like
meanwhile
zooms
he has to go
in.
to hell to find some brat, and that's the real story. That's
Right.
the
Like
story.
Right.
Once
the
we're in
set
there, like,
dressing is very perfunctory in terms of like if you're going to have a kingdom in sword and sorcery, it's very much background. It's very much
Right.
not like you're not up in the high royal intrigue as like main characters. You're
Right.
going to be following like the thief who has to go do the thing. You're going to be following like you're follow again, like it's that bodily thing. It's that like very tight focus thing. Like the stories are centered on characters that have a verisimilitude to them. And
right. So you
so
can
Mhm.
like
have that big kingdom stuff, but you
oh
experience
yeah,
it
you
way more like us.
absolutely. I'm not
But
saying
you
you
would
can't do
no,
that.
no, I know, but I'm saying, but
Um
you would experience it more, like to what you're saying,
right,
yeah, the way we, the readers, tend to, unless you're a king
Mhm.
or a
right,
duke or whatever, you will experience the world way more like most of the readers will, and the big
right.
picture
Right.
stuff can affect your life directly, very much so. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
you're unlikely to be running around in those upper echelons, or any more
It's
than a story about me would have me running through the White House or something.
it's that
Yeah,
thing
like
about you're much closer to being a homeless person than you are to being a billionaire.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
just in terms of reality.
Right.
Um, but yeah, like so that's like some of this, and I think that a lot of the romantasy that's on like the courtly intrigue side, I think Sarah J Maas kind of like put that on like the forefront, and so there's a
Yeah.
lot of like there's a lot of focus on realms of fae and stuff like
Yes,
that,
the Fae realm, the Fae kingdoms.
and
Yes.
so like that sort of stuff, like if you're going to do something like that and make it sword and sorcery, you have to make those fae or that other realm really freaking weird. Which is not to say you can't do that.
Yeah.
You absolutely can. It's just like I'm trying to think of a way to put it. Like all of the stock elements of that type of romantasy, you're just going to have to tweak them to make something that still would conform to the type of like bodily
Mhm.
tight focus, interesting and like focused. I would say like outsider perspectives would be
Right.
like where you would want to put your energy if you were going to do something like that and you wanted to specifically incorporate sword and sorcery elements.
Right.
Yeah,
Because
TA
that's
Marketing's story, which
yes,
I feel that she really nailed that. I won't spoil anything,
yes,
but yeah. Well, check out the anthology, read her
Yeah.
story
yeah,
for a great example of exactly what Jay's talking
Link in
about,
the
right?
bio.
Yeah. But it's
yes,
true
very
though,
much
right? I
someone
mean,
who's dragged into a situation.
yeah. And
Like
it's that again, like well,
yeah,
sorry. I
yeah.
got excited about something and then had to be like, well, you have to buy the book to find out. That's a bad answer.
Yes.
Fair.
Oh dear. But yeah. Like I said, like you can have those big elements, but just they have to be experienced or should
Yeah.
ideally be experienced by the reader. The way we tend to experience those
Yeah,
things.
you just you want a tight lens.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mm. So when it comes to world building, and this isn't specific to like romantasy or sword and sorcery with romance
Sure.
specifically, it's a little bit more general, but if you're, doing the kind of sword and sorcery style world building, that kind of style of setting, if you want to have a plot that really leans into that romantic side of it, or like, a plot that's more romantic, is there
Mhm.
anything that like you tend to see as a trend in the actual world building itself in the way that it's done in order to sort of serve the romance? Or is it kind of just it sort of doesn't like make as
Oh,
much of
that's
a
a great
difference?
question. I don't know that there's I don't know that there's a stock answer to that yet because I
Okay.
don't think that there's enough I don't think there's enough stuff to bounce off of yet to be like, oh, this is doing it the usual way and this is a
Mhm.
new
Yeah.
way. Like
Mhm.
we're very much looking at like, oh, there's a lot of new ways.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say
I must admit that is a tricky one. I all the answers I'm thinking of are just broad writing advice in general, any genre kind of thing,
yeah,
Mhm.
and well,
exactly.
the world building has to create challenges for these two to overcome, but also there's, circumstances to put them together. But I mean, that's everything. So
Yeah.
Right, right.
To SNS specifically, gosh, I'd have to have a real hard think about that one and come back to you.
Yeah, I feel like there's
I
almost just sort of like a like there's that like you have to do all of these things and it has to be interesting.
Right, right, yeah.
Like at the end of the day, that's pretty much what you got to do. Like
Mhm.
that's
Yeah, do everything and do it well simultaneously. That's
yeah.
easy,
Right.
right?
And I mean, to be fair, like that's not it's a little bit me just kind of like being kind of slappy with that answer, but like in terms of what you're like, I'm trying to think of a good way to put it. Like
Well, because so
to
much of Sword and Sorcery's world building, when in my opinion, it's done best is in inferences. It's not mapping out everything. It's giving you just enough to
yes,
kind of intrigue you and get your
leaving
imagination going.
numinous space at the edge of your map wherever possible.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Like Here
you
Be
don't have the
Dragons
rigidly
is
defined
like
magic
a very large
system.
part of your map.
Yeah, you have a lot of fog of war. Yeah, and so I feel like maybe with the couple, like treat or more, treat the relationship the way you treat the world building, and everything will kind of sync up. Don't
Mhm.
give us the whole background of like all their ex partners or something. Just like
Yeah.
don't even tell us how they knew each other before. Maybe they were exes, maybe they weren't. Give us some clues to infer either way, and let us have fun figuring that out. That to me would be a very SNS way of doing the world building specifically to the relationship.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
That
Yeah, I
makes
think that's
sense,
a very
yeah.
thoughtful way to do that.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, whatever.
less is more, and choose carefully what you do reveal to
Yes.
spark
Yeah,
questions
exactly.
and
What
intrigue.
elements you do put on the page are going to say as much as what you leave out. So
Mhm.
being judicious about that in general. I mean, that's just good writing. But
Mhm.
that's also like it's not always easy to gauge like exactly that's going to be in terms of like without trying like you kind of just have to try it and see what you get. But I think I think keeping things numinous, but like having just enough thread for yourself to sort of like tie things together is
Mm-hmm.
like a very valid methodology for either of these subgenres, really.
Yeah. Yeah, fair.
Yeah, which does stand out in the broader fantasy genre, I
Yeah.
think, for sure. Because like I'm not going to poo-poo anybody who likes everything spelled out and have like a lot of world building detail. That's just a different flavor. So
Mm-hmm. So, what would you think? And this may be a tricky question, but when pulling this together, right? Because not to say that having that romance in the romantic, I can talk today.
yeah,
Having the romance and the sword and sorcery isn't necessarily new, but with just
Right.
pulling this together to a very like concerted effort in the anthology, was there anything about that that just like surprised you?
Ooh, that's a really good question also. Um I'm going to say that like I think just the general like positive response,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of kind of like in the same way that like both sword and sorcery and romantasy have sort of like there's a knee jerk reaction a lot of people have to them, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that knee jerk reaction is, oh, I hate that, and in both of them. So
Mm-hmm.
like the amount of just like positive like, oh yeah, is just sort of honestly that's been very pleasing, and trying to like to see where other people's connective tissue is for that, like
Mm-hmm.
everybody that is has given a positive response, but like what they're expecting is like kind of unique.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so again, it gives me a lot of hope, but also like, yeah, as an editor you also have a lot of fear, because like you have curated these babies for you know for a certain period of time, and then you have to let the readers have them, and
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be tough, but I think
another. No,
go
I was
ahead.
gonna say
Sorry.
I'm with you. Yeah, like I just I'm obviously hoping it's positive, and so far has been very positive in the private discussions. I look forward to the breadth of
Mm-hmm.
reactions given the people's expectations
Yes.
going in. Like you say, I think that's gonna be really interesting. And certainly, I would say for me, going through it, I've been delighted and amused at how like I felt that there needed to be more of X, Y, and Z, but then I got to like see it in these manuscripts I've read so far. And Jay, you know the one I'm thinking of. One of them made me actually just go bah, like I made that sound as I like read the first
Yes.
paragraph because it was like taking something I wanted more of and just being like, here it is. And I knew intellectually I wanted more of it, but then I was like, holy hell, that really okay, yeah, okay,
Yep.
phew, my instincts were correct. That hit
It
the
was
spot.
there.
That's what I wanted. You know, I just I knew, but I had not yet experienced, and so yeah, that was very pleasing.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Yeah.
validation of like, oh, our authors do get what we're looking for is has been interesting.
And we
Yeah.
did actually want it because sometimes you say you want something, you get the
Yeah.
bite, and you're like, oh, actually, no,
I
okay, good. I read myself correctly here.
Okay, so my next section is sort of from the like writer author
Sure.
perspective, so stepping back a little bit away from the genres and a bit more general there. And some of these came from some of the writers in my Discord. So the first question is, do you have any advice on people that want to handle like more sensitive topics? So things more on the lines of like things that could be like triggering to people, right? But they don't want to necessarily spell those things out explicitly. Like they want to include that content without really leaning into it.
Mm. That's a toughie, because like so depending on the context and subject matter, like there's some topics that are just kind of going to always create a little bit of potential revulsion in the reader, and I
Mm,
think one of the easiest ways around that is to be mindful of what I'm going to refer to as like mindful of the minefield around those kind of topics. So like
mhm,
if you have some kind of taboo romance, like you kind of this is where like reading widely
mm,
in your category is going to really help you, because you can see how other people have handled it for good and for ill, and like if you aren't seeing material that is dealing with the subject matter that you're particularly interested in,
mm,
That doesn't mean it's not out there. It just probably isn't in like the immediate sphere that you're looking at. So you probably
Mhm.
need to like expand your search a little bit.
Mhm.
Because just about everything that like writers are we are not reinventing wheels out here, especially in romance.
Right.
Like the romance for pretty much every possible subject matter exists. So it's finding the writers who are doing it well, or at least the writers who are doing it the way you want to do it. And
Right.
'cause, like honestly, like modeling what you want to do off of like here's what someone else is doing, but here's how I'm going to do it differently. Like I feel like that's a very compelling way to build something in the same way that like a business plan works, honestly.
Mhm.
If you look at a business plan and you go like, all right, so here's what I'm going to do and here's why it's valuable, here's why it's marketable, here's why people should pay me for it, and here's why mine is going to be different from everybody else's, even though ostensibly it's a product that already exists and I can prove the market exists for it.
Right.
Like in the exact same way that you would do that with a business plan, you do that with your writing. And you go like, all right, so I mean, like honestly, even just pulling my own stupid stuff as an example, like I write kind of like heroic fantasy romance. So like I have I have a lot of authors that I'm leaning on and a lot of authors that I maybe want to emulate, but I'm going to narrow that down and be like, all right, so I'm aiming at people who like this author, but I'm going to differentiate by having a slightly different protagonist and maybe a slightly different like subject matter.
Mhm.
But like so like thinking about things in those kind of terms for even like I want to do a romance that involves like some kind of like non-consensual relationship. Like look at other people writing books about non-consensual relationships. They are absolutely out there.
Mhm. Yeah.
And like and finding ways that like okay, I read this book and I liked it, but I didn't like being a discerning reader about stuff is also going to just it helps so much.
Yeah.
And so like being able to like put your finger down and go like, oh, this part is the part I didn't like, and write around it. Like
Right.
write your version that is a different version of that. Like it
Right.
it's not easy. I'm not going to ever say that it's easy, but it will facilitate results if you are like approaching it from a like I'm writing as an exercise toward getting published to do this or that. So
Mhm. Fair. So the next question is on the much debated author platform,
oh.
which you know, I feel like there is, no correct answer here.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. But if you had any advice on like how necessary they are, but in the frame of like if there are any best places right now maybe to build them, places that are more helpful, that build more traction from, aspiring authors.
Huh. That is a good question.
I think you shouldn't get involved with any given platform if you hate the idea of doing it, view it as a chore. I think you should look at it if you look at a platform and you're like, well, that's where everybody is. I really want to make it work for me. Well, okay, then come at it as like a challenge to find a way that you enjoy it. It's kind of like
Yep.
Mhm.
the old advice about exercise. It's like if you hate the gym, don't do the gym. Figure out what you like. Oh, you like playing tennis? Awesome, play tennis.
Yeah,
Right.
Just like
exactly.
find a way. Like either way, you're exercising, you've achieved your goal. So it's like, yeah, it's similarly for the social media platforms and all that stuff. It's like figure out which ones you actually enjoy using and
Mhm.
figure out how to use them the way you enjoy. And the whole experience will be better for you, and the results will be better. People can
Right.
tell when you're just grinding out a like, I don't know, tell me what you guys think about dragons hashtag dragon book.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. Yeah,
like it's very obvious when
your
you're being
energy
stuff
your
for you.
energy is very detectable. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
so confining your energy to things that bring you joy is definitely going to be like the best way to build a platform.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, I've never built like a bajillion follower, situation on any platform, so maybe I'm not a good person to ask about this in one respect. But I do feel like I've gotten better results overall in my time on social media from promoting my work when I've posted like what felt great when it feels great rather than trying to post every
Right.
Tuesday at 9. Again, no
Yeah.
force. I,
Yep.
I know there's a lot of like advice out there that's like, oh, you got to post at least this many times at these points in time.
Oh,
And like, certainly there are ways to game algorithms, and that is true. But again, I don't know. I think about who I've always responded to, and it's never been people who like always post, Tuesday at 9. It's always been people who just like post
Yeah.
neat stuff. There are people I know who go dormant on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever for months or even years. And then when they pop up again, I'm like, holy crap, it's an event. I remember really enjoying that last time they were talking to online, so, and that gets way
mhm.
more results out of me than people just churning it out.
Yeah.
So, I think there's something to be said for that, certainly. And do you need one? Well, I'm gonna be harsh and say yes.
Okay.
What is the size and the shape of that platform? Again, like customize it to you. Find a way to make it makes you like it. Like I don't want to ever be like, here's a horrible chore. You have to do it. But the fact of the matter is that the more people that know about your thing, the more people might get the thing. The more people might get the thing, the more money you might be able to put in your pocket that you can then use to help facilitate your life and make it possible for you to write. Like it's a
Mhm.
late stage capitalism is a hellscape, but we all live in it, so we got to survive in it for now. I look forward to when we
Yep.
tear it down and replace it with luxury space, gay communism, wherever the phrase goes. But like Jay, what's it called? Luxury space, gay
It's
communism.
gay luxury space communism, I
Gay
believe.
luxury.
Yeah.
I'm saying in the wrong order. Pardon me. I'm misplacing them. But anyway,
Yep.
but yeah, until that happens, we got to survive. And like the horrible, horrible truth. And I'm glad that I've just been a writer for a long time before being a publisher because like I feel like I'm saying this with empathy from both sides of the equation. If you go to publisher and you're like, oh, you promote the book, that's your job. Well, the publisher's going to like you less empirically. They just are because.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that they're also going to sell less of your book, not out of spite, but because they will have less help in doing it.
Mhm.
So that's where the author platform comes in. Now, do I ever want to publish someone just because they got a bajillion followers or something? Like, no.
No.
Because it's I want to publish people who are doing things I want to be publishing, and I want and of course you try and get bums in seats kind of thing. But like it's like I got Michael Moorcock, right? Who his heyday may have been a little a few years before now, but nonetheless is still a very recognizable name in fantasy for sure. And I was
Mhm.
super lucky to get him last year for the magazine. But he's a patron saint of sword and sorcery. He made perfect sense. It's not like
Mhm.
if somehow I got
Right.
Stephen King. Well, that's amazing. I got Stephen King, but like he's never really written in that genre. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I would have gotten a lot of people coming in and maybe buy the magazine once, but then be like, huh? And then throw it aside
Yeah.
and not come back. So as a publisher, like that's not for me, like I'm kind of looking at all angles. I want to have someone who makes sense and is doing exciting new stuff. And I'm certainly here to build new careers. I'm already working with authors who are like, I've been their first publication or one of their first ones. Um, but if that person, whether they're like Johnny Nobody with 5 followers on Blue Sky or Jenny Everybody with like 1 billion followers, I need them to fit what I'm trying to do, and I need them to have an author platform of some shape and be willing to help me.
Mhm.
And if they and I'm fine if the first time we work together, I'm building their follower count more than they're building my follower count. It's just this thing of like,
The
I
whole
just want
point
to
of
feel
this
that we're
thing.
collaborating.
Right.
We're collaborating and lifting
Yeah.
each other up. And that's the answer. It's not about saying, well, this part's your job and this part's your job. No, no, no. Let's both work together to promote this thing and build each other up. Let's both work together. And like another thing that sometimes people go, well, that's the publisher's job. Let's both try and kill all the
Yeah.
typos in the manuscript. Let's both try and make the thing read as clean as possible. I just think it's not quite a zero sum game. What's the phrase I'm looking for? But just I don't know, crabs in a bucket, whatever. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. I'm just gonna say it's bullshit. I'm gonna say it's bullshit when
Yeah.
either the author or the publisher puts all the onus on the other. I think for
Right.
most things, obviously there are some
Mhm.
elements that have to be exclusively like budgeting. That's the publisher's problem. But I mean, aside of a few very specific things, it's way better if we just like work together. I nearly do it with my hands together. Now I'm not saying the editor and the publisher have to kiss. That'd be weird. But they should at least shake hands and work together. And I need my dolls apparently for my podcast interviews. Anyway,
I
so that's my
I
point.
am
That's my point.
preparing a box to send
Yeah,
to you now at
you
this
just give me a
point.
generic like
Um,
publisher and writer dollies. Anyway, so that's my feeling
uh,
about the platform. It all comes down to the fact that like it sucks, but it's there. So find a way to make it fun and consider it something that you're doing in tandem. Like the best publisher that you can work with will be one that will work with you in tandem and play to both your mutual strengths, and you both try and help each other out as best you can
I want to tag
without
on to
anybody
one.
getting burnt
Oh,
out. That's a big part of it.
I'm gonna tag on to one thing that Oliver was saying too. Like, don't do things that don't bring you joy. As far as like if you find that being on Twitter is like gouging your own eyeballs out, like don't gouge your own eyeballs out. Like by God, but like find your lane. Find one place where you can be online, even if it's just like one Tumblr blog where someone who knows your name can find you on the internet. That is mission critical. And
Right.
like it helps if you have connections to other people, and those other people don't have to be famous people. Those just have to be people that also like your stuff.
Mhm.
um Building that community is essential to you as a creator, not just because like, oh, they're going to buy your stuff, but like having people to bounce things off of is an innate, like, as a writer, it's like the one thing that you really need that doesn't come with the territory. Like, if you don't have other writer friends who can tell you, hey, like, I like your story, or hey, I don't like your story. But like,
Right.
I mean, just in general, like having people to bounce things off of, having people who are also in the scene, and sort of just like being open to what's out there, I think it becomes easier if you have a place to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to focus on everywhere. You don't have to do you don't have to have every single social media platform. I do. I'm extremely online. I've been extremely online since 1998. It's not going away. But like for most people, it's much better to focus all of your energy in one place where you can kind of just be yourself and not trying to be like a writer too hard, just sort of like what are you bringing to the table that nobody else can bring to the table, like in any of the other parts of being a writer. It's the same thing on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I think you put that well, Jay. Like, like, don't cosplay a writer. Just be
Yes.
yourself. Be the kind
Right.
of writer you are. I think some people do get hung up on that. Yeah, like presenting as such or whatever. Like, oh, look at me, I'm running the coffee shop. They never run at the coffee shop, but they took a picture there
Right.
because they
Right.
heard this. So, I think it's way more interesting to find out where people do things. And even if you're like, well, I just do everything on my desk. Okay, fine. What's your desk look like? Maybe that's kind of fun, something to share, But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm getting a little on tangent here.
Everybody brings something unique. So like what
Yeah.
is it that you bring? In my case, it's like I collect weird dolls from the 80s, and sometimes like s- sometimes that actually gets like into my other writing stuff. Like that's it's one of those things where like you build community around like what thing you bring that's unique.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think sorry, what I was struggling to get to because I'm too long-winded was the parallel community building, Jay, is what you're bringing up. I think the social media platform thing, people get very like hierarchical of like, well, there's me and there's my followers. But it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, yeah, maybe think about it more parallel and the people who can help you in all the ways Jay mentioned, also just recommending people to each other, right? Like
Yep.
most authors I tend to hear about
make
tend to be
make
somebody.
make friends who are peers, because
Mhm.
peers are colleagues. And that's actually like, I mean, that was a lecture we had at a workshop I attended. But in general, like your colleagues are also online. And they're all real people. Like they're very much not like demigods on a pillar somewhere. Like everybody is just a person, and so you
Mhm.
have to act like they're people. And if
Yeah.
you make friends with people, those people will make friends with you. Like
Yeah.
it's a mutual thing.
With the both
So
respect shown and lack of intimidation that comes with them. They're
yes.
just a person, but they are a person.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah.
step on people, don't treat them like a
Yeah, don't
ladder,
don't
but
be
like
weird and treat it like a power game, like your Game of
yeah,
Thrones over here with you're trying to compete to get like a anyway, yeah,
yeah.
just
But I think
I won't get into it, but
really
I've seen some people who treat this as like what was it someone said to me recently? Like the lower the stakes, the higher they feel to a lot of people.
yeah.
So yeah. Oh, and one last thing I'll just say is that as an annoyed publisher, whether you're an author or an artist, for the love of God, have easy contact information. Easy to
Yes.
find, super easy to find contact information. I have literally not
The
reached out to
difference
some people
between
sometimes
hired
because
and
they're
not
literally
hired
free.
is, do you have an email address that everyone can find?
Yeah, because editors and publishers are always like chronically overworked. If they can't find your contact info real quick, they're just going to be like, well, you know,
Oh, well.
there's somebody else who'll write or draw that thing. Anyway, I feel like we've gone at length, but yeah, the author platform
Yeah.
thing is like I think we can sum up. It's just sorry you got to have one if you want people to find your work, but
Yeah.
make it fun, make it
Make it
work for you.
yours.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Make
yeah,
it yours, and it won't feel like such a slog.
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't treat it
Yeah.
like math
I
homework.
Yeah, I really like that suggestion and that advice. It very much vibes with the things that have worked for me and very much not worked with me. I tried Twitter. No. No
Yeah.
Twitter for me.
There was an era, it's gone.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now you can just feel fine about it. If Twitter didn't work for you, like don't worry.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
It ain't great no more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean I left it well before that, but
Yeah. Well, no, there's no one. It's not. It used to be a little bit easier because it would just be like, just go to Twitter. But like, there's
Mhm.
not any one place now. You're just
Mhm.
gonna have to find a place that feels good enough
Mhm.
Yeah.
and figure it out. And a lot of it really like the other thing is that I think a lot of people forget is that not a lot of people are going to see it no matter what. So you
Mhm.
might as well just like really lean in. Like if you
Mhm.
decide you don't like it later, just walk away. Like there's the obligations and the string. Like I feel like a lot of people put a lot of like weight on like the permanence of the internet, but like the impermanence of the internet is also a thing.
Yeah.
Especially with just like the information overload we experience every single day.
It does
No
remind me
Yeah.
one
though.
is gonna no one is gonna remember the embarrassing thing you said. I'm sorry.
I'll say
Right.
one last thing, and then we should probably cut this answer off because we've been on for a
Yes.
while. The
Okay.
closest thing to permanence, though, mailing list. I don't mean
Mhm.
having a newsletter. I don't mean having a newsletter because I don't like writing newsletters, and yeah, but I
Wow.
keep a mailing list for my publishing company. And
Mhm.
once in a blue moon, I'll be like, oh, we got a crowdfund coming out, or we got a book coming out. When there's news to say, that's when I write people. But building that mailing list is key because Twitter is what it is. Other platforms
Yep.
are dying or have died. LiveJournal's gone. Whatever. Email is the closest thing we have to something that is eternal online.
Mhm.
So that would be, I guess, my last little recommendation there is like, yeah, email.
And you don't
Anyway,
need to do that right away. That's really much more of like a thing you can build over time. Like you're not gonna have a
oh
long
yeah,
list.
sorry, yeah,
For,
gradually build
Mhm.
it. Yeah, no, you're not going to
Yeah.
start a mailing list
build
and
it,
have like
you know,
5,000 subscribers
build
right
it
away.
when it feels right. Don't feel like you
Yeah.
have to do it right away. But once you are at a point where you're like, you know what I'd like to do is grow this thing. That's the single biggest thing you can do to grow the thing.
Yeah.
A complete
Yeah.
agreement there.
So crowdfunding. So the recent success and recent success in the the book publishing world, but also like a lot of publishing in general, right? In crowdfunding. I can't talk this evening. Has been
Right.
very interesting, and it's definitely been kind of blowing up, not just lately, but like, in recent times it has become a much more prevalent thing, which you'll obviously are aware of. Um, but do you think this is a trend that is applicable for writers specifically that they should be watching, especially with sites that, specifically crowdfund individual people and projects like Patreon and Ko-fi and all that sort of stuff?
Well, I guess yeah, okay. So this is one of
That's
those things
interesting.
that where I can just go, haha, crack my fingers, and then like 5 hours go by. So I'll just say, Patreon and Coffee are different creatures, right? Because they're
Mhm.
about like steady income.
Mhm.
While say Backerkit, which I'm using, or Kickstarter, or that's about getting a single project off the ground. And those have very different needs. I think
Mhm.
authors, more than publishers, should be looking at building Patreon followings. If they can, or a variety. You want to have a variety of flows, but
Yeah.
essentially stuff that will help give them a regular monthly income to allow
Mhm.
them to create the space in their lives to write and to occasionally invest in their writing. If say they self pub by paying for that cover art for that one book that they're doing, that kind of
Right.
thing.
Mhm.
Especially if you're a newer author, like this is going to build slow, and you just gotta roll with it. What can I say? Unless you're very lucky, but that's okay. That's okay. Even just like an extra $50 a month can often make a big difference to a lot of people. It certainly has to me. So yeah, as far as crowdfunding books, I mean that's you're putting on your big capital P publisher pants when you do that, even if you have a smaller goal, just because of the way they work. I will warn people. Come in with an audience. You absolutely grow your audience when you crowdfund. But to come in just like, hello, no, you've
Yeah.
never
If
heard
you
me
don't have
before.
a
I got a book.
baseline,
It's
it's going to
about,
be hard.
yeah, it's gonna
Yeah.
be. I would go past hard,
Yeah.
unless your
Oh
goal
yeah.
is
Yeah.
to raise
No,
$30 to buy
I was
yourself a
being
bunch of
cute.
chocolate bars. Like it's gonna be. I forget the swearing policy here, but just imagine I swore really hard for emphasis and then impossible. It's
Yeah.
going to be really, absolutely just impossible. No, it's something you do when you've built up an audience. It doesn't have to be, again, Stephen King or Michael Moorcock or whatever, but man, make sure you got at least like a few, couple hundred reliable people that are going to show up for you for this kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then use it as an opportunity to build on that.
Mhm.
Because people on the platform will hopefully find you, and of course, you will have an opportunity with a crowdfund to have something to talk about. That's the joy, right? With Patreon
Yeah.
is steadily chugging along. It's kind of hard to be like, interview me about my stuff because it's the same as it was last month and the same as it will be next month. But with a
Right.
project like, well, boom, crowdfund. Well, here we
Yeah.
are, proof of that. It gives you
Yeah.
something to chat about and go around and hopefully, go on other people's platforms and then draft some of their audience and bring some of your audience to them, and it's the whole mutual lifting up thing I was describing earlier. So that's
Mhm.
where crowdfunding is very different when you look at like platforms like Kickstarter and Backerkit versus Patreon and Coffee. That'd be the big difference there. Is there anything more specific you want me to drill down on? He said, cutting himself off.
No, I mean, I think you kind of touched both the kind of sides of that.
Yeah, like I mean, it's something like the pre-order thing for crowdfunding is another way to. I would encourage people to think of it as just think of it as you already have a thing you're pre-ordering. Don't get too lost in the weeds of it being like a magical thing where you press a button and money comes out. Not how it works. I wish it
Mhm.
was. There's any successful crowdfund that you see had a phenomenal amount of work behind it.
So my last question is a bit more general. What would your, biggest advice for writers be that are looking to get published one day?
Traditionally published, like Big Five published, or published by like
Um,
mid or like independent publisher, or self-published.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can give
That's a
three
big question
answers.
right there.
Because yeah, like
That's
I know I'm teasing a little. I'm intentionally being difficult because I think that the question of like how do I get published one day, like I think for most people no longer has the implications it used to, which was, well, how do I get published by, Simon and Schuster or one of those other biggies?
Right.
Because there's a lot of good reasons not to go with any of those three options, and a lot of good reasons to go with any of those three options.
Right.
God, and how do we compress those down, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to leap on this because this is actually a question that I have been wrestling with for I'll politely call it a decade, and that's not actually the right answer. I've been on the like Trad Pub hamster wheel for a very, very long time in a few specific areas. So I mean, like I do dev editing for other people and stuff like that, but in terms of like my own publishing and stuff, I realized after like, and I mean, I have taken a world class workshop. I've done all of the things that like everyone tells you to do. I had many thousands of followers on Twitter. Like, I mean, like this is not something that like, I'm trying to think of a way to put it. Like you can do all the things right and it's still not going to work for Trad Pub sometimes. So
Yeah.
like a really important thing is to sort of like figure out why it is that you want to tell stories. Why do you want to tell stories? And this is that business plan again. Like like very in a very sincere way, like why this story? And like if it's just like for me, I have ADHD and OCD. Like I can't not tell stories. So part of it for me is getting the story out of my head and like ideally in front of a few people who might like it. And for me, those people who like it are more validating than any paycheck. And so
Right.
like as much as I want to make a lot of money at this, for me the part is getting the noise out of my head and into somebody else's head. And so like if I can do that part and do it consistently, that's going to be success for me. And so like defining what success looks like for you is going to be the like single biggest determining factor here.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the more you make that rely on other people, the more unsatisfied you're going to be. So like it has to be about you. It has to be about like what you want out of it. And if what you want out of it is just like attention from other people, like there's only so far you can go on that one. And I can tell you like even just the fact that my book exists and I can show it to other people, like that's enough for me. And so like when those people come back to me like, hey, I loved your book, it's like amazing. I can't even describe what that feels like. But I figured that out, that was the thing that was going to make my stories work. And so I can tell the stories I want to tell instead of the stories I think trad publishing wants me to tell. And so like there's a lot of like griping about like what trad wants and what they don't want. But like at the end of the day, tailoring what I was doing so that nobody could look at it, like because that's the thing with trad publishing is that like publishing takes years and like trad in particular is exceedingly slow. And so like the feedback that I need of that, like I read your book, that is more, I'm not going to get that if I'm on the query letter hamster wheel. The like I'm only sending this story to 2 editors and then I'm putting it in a trunk because nobody else will buy it because it's exactly the wrong size for every magazine. That's not going to work for me. So I have to figure out a different method. And so finally, like last summer, I put my first book out and I did it anonymously through a contest. So that was actually kind of like an added level of difficulty that like not only did I put a book out, but also I couldn't actually tell anybody as me that it was my book. And so that was like it added a level of like a level of nuance to the project that actually added some clarity later to like, okay, here's the part I liked, here's the part I didn't like, and here's what I can do with that. And that was more valuable than like 10 query letter evaluations, you know, like trying to figure out what thing about this is specifically motivating you is going to be the thing. Like if you can find your lodestone, find it, center it, and use it.
And it might take time. It might really take
it's a
time.
process. It's a project. Like I said a decade and like there's big asterisks around it. That's just like the decade where I was like serious.
And what you want might change, of course. For me, I think about what led me to publishing, which I may sound funny because you asked about writers, but I mean, I think it's similar in the sense of like there was a whole bunch of stuff that had to kind of like align before I
Right.
was like, okay, I'm gonna do a magazine, and then from there on to where we are now. Um, and definitely one element of it was the fact that I had done kind of something very much like the Query Letter Hamster Wheel with big publishers in the world of TV. You know, I'd done a lot of screenwriting. I'd been fortunate enough to be one of the people who got paid, but I never been one of the people who got their stuff to the point of it being on screen and I can say, go watch my TV
Right.
show. And so it was this very frustrating thing of like doing a lot of work for stuff that got read by, if I was lucky, a couple of dozen people before. It was like, well, that didn't happen, you know?
Yep.
And so I, and I looked
Yeah, you
over
think
it like,
querying is rough, but whew.
yeah, holy cow.
Yeah.
And so you look, and so I then just like to say, like I didn't plan it, but things kind of came together that made sense to me. Like maybe I'll do a magazine, and I very quickly realized that one of the reasons why I like doing it, one of the reasons why I'm pushing hard to expand further into publishing, is because I love having a sense of agency. After years of being like, please,
Yep.
millionaires, give me some things I need to do a story that people can experience outside of the 12 of you reading the script or whoever, how many people. I really want to be the person who could turn around and go, "Hey, I want to make your thing." Like I love publishing other people's work, as it turns out, and a big part of that is being able to give that sense of agency, like to them, and having the agency to like make things happen within me, and the fact that so much I'm learning. You know, I've got my long, slow burn Sword and Sorcery novel that is almost done the outline, and I know I'm going to make it to go longer because of the publishing, but I don't mind that because by the time that book is ready, if I choose to publish it myself, by God, I'll do a better job. You know, because of everything I've
Right.
learned through publishing other people,
Mm.
and the resources I'll have at hand and so on. You know, I look forward to the physical object of that book. You know, anyway, mine is an unusual journey, I admit, but it still comes back to what Jay is saying. I guess I just want to like huge double thumbs up. You know, Reddit +1, whatever. What Jay's saying about how like, man, you got to figure out what your actual goals are rather than looking at saying, I want to write. What is the victory condition of writing? Well, I guess that's selling 1 billion copies of your book and everybody knowing your name. Well, it's like, is that your victory condition, or is that just what you think of as the default victory
Right.
condition?
Right. There's aspirations and there's practicalities.
Mm.
Yeah.
And if you exceed your own aspirations, that's great. But having a very realistic, like, what will make me happy here in the immediate short term is like
Yeah.
really necessary, because otherwise you're going to make yourself crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
The
the thing
person
too,
who
right?
has
Like,
absolutely made myself crazy.
yeah, because even if ultimately your goal is to, you know, be the next Stephen King or whoever, well, what's going to make you happy in the meanwhile? Because that's not going to happen
Yeah.
overnight.
Because that's not going to happen. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
just it. There's no such thing as overnight success in this business.
Mhm.
Yeah, every time you think there is, you read a book about them later
There's a
or something,
decade
and it's
behind
like,
it,
oh
no matter
yeah,
what.
yeah,
Doesn't matter.
there's time,
Yeah.
time or a big team.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this 19-year-old author. It's like, well, yeah, plus this giant company that
Yeah.
put
And their,
themselves behind
and their
them making all
parents,
the
and
work there.
also their household staff.
Right.
Yes, yes, yes,
It all came together.
yes. Yeah.
So yeah, you can't
But
compare
then,
yourself to an author that has a staff. I'm sorry.
no,
And
Yeah.
honestly, comparison is going to always be the enemy of your own career.
that too.
It's just
So yeah,
never, like, as much as it is useful to have a lodestone, that lodestone shouldn't be another person or another person's
yeah.
career.
Don't be doing that. No. I don't know why I started slipping into a weird accent. I'm tired. Sorry, Madeline. But yeah, I think that's the answer. Again, some of these questions are very. You know, we could have a whole talk just on that.
We could talk about that for a
But I
week.
think that's a good start. I think that's a good answer for now.
Yeah. No, I agree. But yeah, so I'm gonna have all the information about the Backerkit and appropriate links and everything down below and all that. Was there anything else either of you wanted to add real quick?
Yeah, I would just sort of reiterate a little bit in the video if that's okay, because the description is good, but you want to have in the video too. You know, yeah, go to newedgeswordandsorcery.com. You scroll down, I'll have a big image and a big button saying, go check out the crowdfund for Beating Hearts and Battle Axes. Can't miss it through there, or go to Backerkit and search for, you know, Beating Hearts and Battle Axes. I promise we're the only one. And yeah. I mean, there's a unique reward for the very first backer. Come in at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on June 20th to try and get it, and also special rewards for people who come in within the first 48 hours. But even if you slip in at the last minute, you know, by that point, hopefully we'll have unlocked the stretch goals and it'll be an even more special book. So yeah, I think it's going to be kind of a party, like with the magazine. We're going to have live streams. We're going to have quizzes, whatever. We're going to have, you know, we're still figuring it out because it's weeks away from now. But I always like to try and make a crowdfund like an event, an ongoing fun thing. It's going to be so much more than just like, please buy the book. So yeah, come check it out. See what the party's all about. See what, you know, surprises we have. Like the last one, we didn't know until halfway through we were going to have a music dungeon synth like live stream concert. So I don't know what the heck's going to happen even like fully myself, and I'm the publisher. So yeah, come on, check it out. Battle of Beating Hearts and Battle Axes. And you can check it out through newedgeswordandsorcery.com or searching for it on Backerkit or going to the doobly-doo. Do we still call it that?
Some people do.
I feel,
I'll
yeah,
think
John
of it.
Green does, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
You know, check out the YouTube description box for the link where you can go and find out all kinds of details. And if you're seeing this before June 20th, that's cool. Still go through the link because you can go to our teaser page, learn some more details, and sign up to be alerted when it launches, so you can be more competitive for that first backer reward. Yep.
Very good. All right. Well, then, you know, it was great talking to both of you. This was a lot of fun. And I will see everyone next time.
It's absolutely lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.